"Don't open the door, teach her how to save water." My daughter-in-law spat those cruel words as she turned the lock, trapping me in the bathroom for 2 days, in the very house I had bought with my own sweat and blood. Outside, my son calmly turned on the TV, leaned back in his chair, and laughed, as if his mother's humiliation were nothing more than cheap entertainment. I shivered inside a damp towel, no food, no chair, just the cold tile floor and the steady drip of water. While I curled up in the dark, they ate dinner and laughed together, unaware that in that exact moment I had made a decision. I would take everything back, and that would be the last peaceful dinner they'd ever have in this house. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I'm Lila Whitmore, 71 years old, living in Virginia. I once thought old age would bring me peace, mornings making coffee in my own kitchen, listening to sparrows outside the window, and sometimes visiting church on Sundays. But peace only comes when you stop placing your trust in the wrong people. I never imagined I'd be locked in a bathroom by my own daughter-in-law like a criminal. I never imagined my only son, the child I held through freezing nights, whose forehead I kissed every time he had a fever, could sit there, casually turn up the TV, hear the click of a lock, and laugh. A small laugh, buried under TV commercials, that still stabs my heart every time I remember it. That bathroom was small, cold, and damp. I had only a towel around me, my hair still dripping. The chill from the tile seeped into my back and legs, making my knees ache. I leaned against the wall, staring at the dim light leaking under the door. No chair, no food, just the steady drip of the faucet and the clink of silverware outside the everyday rhythm of people who had forgotten their humanity. I didn't cry. I've cried plenty in my life: when my husband died, when I lost my job, when I sold our old car to pay my son's hospital bill. But this time I stayed quiet. I knew tears don't wake anyone up. They only make you weaker. I rested my head against the wall and closed my eyes, letting memories pour in. Over 40 years ago, my husband Edward and I worked ourselves to the bone to buy this house. A small place in the suburbs of Richmond, 2 bedrooms, an apple tree in the backyard, and a white fence Edward painted himself. When he died of heart disease, I swore I'd keep this house at any cost, because it was the last piece of us left. I never imagined it would become my prison. I remember the day Cole brought Alyssa over. She was young, pretty, and smart, the kind of woman any man would want beside him. I was happy my son had found someone good. I welcomed her with an apple pie Edward used to love, and Alyssa beamed and hugged me. I didn't know then it would be the last time she was sincere. In the first months after they married, they lived with me because they couldn't afford a place yet. I didn't mind. I said, "This house is yours. Think of it as a start." I didn't mention the deed was still in my name, not from suspicion, but because I didn't think I needed to guard myself from family. I was the mother, and that was my son. Looking back now, that thinking was both naive and foolish. Things changed gradually. At first, Alyssa made small comments. "Mom, you leave the lights on too much," or "This dish smells too strong." I nodded, smiled, and figured she liked things tidy. But then her words got sharper. "She still thinks this is her house." I heard it as I passed the kitchen. Cole stayed silent. He neither defended his mother nor pushed back on his wife, just silence. And silence can be crueler than words. I lived in the same house but felt more and more like an uninvited guest. I tried to keep the peace, cooking and doing laundry for myself, avoiding their dinner hour. When they went to work, I weeded the backyard and trimmed the roses. Once, I repainted the fence Edward left behind. Cole stepped out, looked at me and said coldly, "Mom, you're too loud. I'm trying to rest." I turned back, smiled softly, and apologized. But something cracked inside me. That night I couldn't sleep. I looked around my small room, the wedding photo of me and Edward, the wooden box with the house papers, an old safe, only I knew the combination to. I brushed my hand over the deed and thought, I'm still the owner of this house. Then I gave a bitter little smile. Owner? An owner who has to whisper in the dark just to remember she still has any rights? 2 days later, everything blew up over a hot shower. I'd been fixing the fence all afternoon. It was cold. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves. When I finished, my back ached and my hands trembled. I went to shower just to let warm water soothe my old shoulders. 10 minutes, only 10 minutes. The first pounding on the door startled me. "How long are you going to be?" Alyssa's voice snapped, sharp and hard. I answered, "Just a moment, I'm almost done." Silence. A few seconds later, the lock clicked. I spun around, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It didn't budge. I pounded on the door and called Cole's name. No answer. The TV got louder. I heard silverware clinking. Laughter. I stood still. My heart raced, but my mind suddenly felt strangely calm. I wrapped the towel around me and sat on the cold tile, watching the water spread in irregular streaks. I could hear my own breathing slow and steady, like I was counting the minutes. I tried calling out once more. No response, only the sitcom laughs from the living room. When the imaginary clock in my head finished its first full circle, I knew more than an hour had passed. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I didn't understand what I was being punished for using water or simply existing. That first night, I curled up in the dark, listening to the pipes knock like a heartbeat. The old smell of tile, dampness, and leftover soap mixed together. I drank from the faucet, the metallic taste cold and bitter. I bit my lip so I wouldn't cry. On the second day, my head swam, my lips cracked, my hands went numb. I heard Alyssa walk by. Her voice drifted back. She must have learned her lesson. Cole said nothing. Not one objection. Not one question about whether I was even alive. But in the hunger and the humiliation, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I've lived through loss, through the loneliness of widowhood, through freezing nights without enough heat. Nothing could break me. No one could keep me locked up forever, especially not in my own house. And when the door opened on the morning of the third day, Alyssa looked at me blankly and said, "Next time, learn to save." Cole stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. I just nodded. No words. No tears. I walked past them, hair wet, bare feet, back to my room. I shut the door and took a deep breath. On the table was the safe key. Morning light fell across the desk and lit up the framed deed. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with someone who had just found her strength again. I whispered to myself, "You turned the lock, but I'm the one holding the key." And from that moment on, the quiet plan to leave and take everything back began to form. I still remember that February morning air, so cold it cut the skin, frost on the porch, and the phone ringing at 5 a.m. The doctor on the line, voice hoarse, said that Edward, my husband, didn't survive his second heart attack. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me that suddenly tasted like nothing. The house felt too big, too quiet. Down the hall, Cole, only 8 years old, slept soundly, unaware that from that day on our world had changed forever. I watched him breathe, his little cheeks rising and falling, and whispered a promise I've never broken. "I will not let you go hungry. I will not let you. I feel alone." That vow kept me standing through every year that followed. I packed away my tears, dried my face, and the next day went out to find work. In the mornings, I cleaned a small office downtown. Hands used to holding a soup ladle now pushed a mop. The smell of cleaning chemicals stuck to my hair and skin, impossible to wash off even after 2 showers. In the afternoons, I worked the register at a corner store, standing 10 hours, smiling at every customer even as my feet swelled. At night I did mending under a dim yellow lamp, stitches blurring as my eyes burned. Every time I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, I told myself, it's okay, as long as Cole has enough food and books. There were winter days when snow slowed the buses, and I got home near midnight. My fingers numb, lips cracked, but the moment I heard my boy whisper, "Mom?" the house felt warm again. I lit the stove, reheated the soup, and split the meal, the only piece of meat always in Cole's bowl. Mine was just broth and a few slices of potato. I never felt deprived. Watching him eat well made me feel full. Years later, I can still smell the wood burning in the fireplace, hear the spoons scraping the pot, feel his small hand on mine as he said, "Mom, I'll take care of you someday." Promise. I believed him with all my heart. I gave up small things women enjoy: new clothes, lipstick, a salon visit to spare a few more dollars for my son. When Cole hit high school and wanted to play baseball, I picked up an overnight warehouse shift to buy him a glove and cleats. Every time I saw him suited up on the field, pride brought me to tears. I thought, if Edward were here, he'd be smiling just like I was. Every birthday, even when I barely had anything left, I baked him a little cake. Once, I scraped together leftover flour, mixed in some sugar, and used our old rusty oven. When I lit the candle, he blew it out and grinned. "Mom, this is the best cake in the world." I laughed and turned away so he wouldn't see my tears of happiness. I thought, as long as he grows up kind, every sacrifice is worth it. But life rarely plays fair. After Cole went to college, I thought I could rest a bit. Tuition cost more than I imagined. I didn't want him buried in debt. I picked up a morning cleaning job at the library and a temporary cashier shift at a small neighborhood supermarket. At night, I did extra mending and fixed neighbors' jeans. Some mornings I fell asleep at the kitchen table, a spoon's imprint on my cheek. But when I read his letters from school, telling me his GPA was high, I found the strength to keep going. I only wished that one day Cole would graduate, find a good job, start a family, and be able to take care of himself. At graduation, I sat in the stands, clutching his diploma in its wrinkled envelope. I cried tears of joy, because everything I'd worked for had taken shape. I thought maybe Edward was watching from somewhere, smiling. After the ceremony, Cole hugged me tight. I still remember that hug, heartbeat for heartbeat. "Mom, I'm here because of you." I thought those words would stay with me for life, but maybe that was the moment I made my mistake. I thought love and sacrifice naturally grow gratitude. I didn't know that when kindness has no boundaries, it teaches others to see it as obligation. In the years after Cole started working, I still didn't slow down. I kept waking at 5 a.m., making coffee and breakfast, waiting for his footsteps on the stairs. I still asked, "What do you want to eat?" like he was still 8. I didn't realize I'd raised in him the habit of being served, not the habit of sharing. I still remember the dinner when Cole turned 30. He brought Alyssa over to meet me. I cooked all day: pot roast, salad, pie, the dishes Edward used to love. When they arrived, I was waiting at the door, hands still dusty with flour. Alyssa hugged me and said sweetly, "Mom, Lila, Cole says you're the best cook in the city." I laughed, warmth flooding my chest. I thought, how wonderful my son has found someone who appreciates him. But during that meal, when I put a piece of meat on Cole's plate, Alyssa gently set her hand on mine and said, in a voice soft as a feather, "Mom, let me take care of him, okay?" I nodded, thinking nothing of it. But that night, for the first time, I noticed my own plate was untouched when they had already finished eating. I'd been busy watching my son, busy talking, and forgot to eat. No one noticed. And strangely, that very dinner was when I first felt I was missing my share. In the years after Cole married Alyssa, I kept thinking she just needed time to adjust. I believed love would help people understand one another. I thought if I gave a little more, the family would be peaceful. I never imagined that very willingness to yield would teach them how to keep pushing the line. Once, a neighbor said to me, "Mrs. Lila, you're too gentle." When kids get used to being pampered, they start treating it like a right. I only smiled. He's my only son. How could I be angry with him? Looking back now, I see I was wrong from that very moment. I thought I could use affection to fight selfishness, use tolerance to dissolve ingratitude. But kindness without boundaries is nothing more than an invitation for others to step over yours. All those years of working myself to exhaustion, I never imagined the money I sweated for, the pieces of cake I split to save for my son, would one day become someone else's fancy dinner, one where I no longer had a seat. I spent my life making sure Cole lacked nothing: food, clothes, love. What I failed to teach him was how to value those things. And maybe that was the first mistake that led to all the tragedies that followed. Cole's wedding took place on an early summer afternoon in the little backyard where Edward had built a wooden swing for our boy when he was 5. I spent a whole month preparing, repainting the fence, trimming the apple tree, washing every curtain. I wanted everything perfect for my son's big day. Cole wore a navy suit and looked mature and confident. Alyssa, in a simple, elegant white dress, made my heart pinch a little. She was so beautiful, radiant, as if every light pointed toward her. When the music started, I stood in the very last row, holding a small bouquet. I watched my son walk down the aisle, eyes shining, and told myself, "You've truly grown up." In that moment, I believed every hardship, every year of toil had meaning. After the ceremony at the small backyard reception, Cole took my hand and said, "Mom, I wouldn't be here without you." I smiled, and for a moment all the tired years melted away. I looked around the house where his childhood laughter once echoed and knew I was about to hand it to the next generation. When the guests had left, I placed an envelope on the dining table inside were the house papers. I said, "This house is yours. I want you two to have a solid start." Alyssa froze, eyes brimming, and Cole hugged me tight. But there was one thing I didn't say. The deed was still in my name. Not because I didn't trust my son, but because Edward's old attorney had once advised me to keep ownership until necessary. He called it a legal spare key for when life doesn't go as planned. At the time, I never thought I'd need it. I moved into the small room at the end of the hallway, where light only slipped in through a tiny window facing the backyard. I brought a few of my things: Edward's armchair, the wooden box of documents, and our wedding photo. I wanted the young couple to have their own space. I cooked for myself, did my own laundry, and tried to keep myself small and quiet, like a guest renting a room in my own house. At first, Alyssa was very sweet. She called me Mom, asked what I liked to eat, even made me a cup of afternoon tea now and then. I thought I was lucky to have such a considerate daughter-in-law. I helped them decorate the living room, reorganize the kitchen, tidy the yard, and felt happy to still be useful. Then the gentle words shifted into constant little reminders. "Mom, could you turn the TV off earlier? It's a bit loud." "Mom, this bone broth smells great, but the scent spreads all over the house." Or, "Mom, your slippers are a little off. I'm afraid someone might trip." At first, I didn't mind. I figured she just wanted the place neat. But when those comments repeated day after day, I began to feel like a clumsy guest in the very place I had built. Cole, as usual, chose silence. Whenever I looked a little down or drifted away, he only said, "Mom, don't worry about it. Alyssa's just particular. I just want a peaceful house." I heard "let it go" to keep the peace so often it became routine. I tried to be patient. I got up earlier, turned off the TV sooner, cooked separate dishes with less smell. I always believed silence kept the peace. I'd been through a long marriage. I knew when to avoid conflict. But silence, stretched too long, becomes an invisible wall, and once it's up, it's hard to tear down. One evening, I heard Alyssa on the phone in the living room, her voice sweet but tinged with fatigue. "You know, living with your mother-in-law isn't easy. She's nice, but it still feels like this is her house." I stood still behind the door, dish towel in hand. I wasn't angry. I just felt cold. Yes, this house was mine. But her words made me realize in her eyes, I was someone who'd stayed too long and refused to leave. I pulled back. I avoided the living room, cooked when they were at work, cleaned when they slept. At dinner, I'd leave my portion on the table and eat later in my room. I didn't want anyone to have to put up with my presence anymore. Sometimes Cole came into my room, sat down, and asked a few polite questions. "Mom, you doing okay? Do you need anything?" I always answered, "I'm fine." I didn't want to bother him. But the painful truth was that the warm bond between us had thinned into pure obligation. I still remember a late night while I was folding laundry. Alyssa walked in, her usual small smile gone. "Mom, I think we should do our own laundry. Thank you, but we want to get used to doing it ourselves." I nodded and swallowed a sigh. After she left, I stared at the half-folded clothes. For the first time in years, I felt truly unnecessary. Even so, I kept my Sunday morning tea habit. I made 3 cups and set them on the kitchen table. 2 always stayed full. One morning, Alyssa looked at me, smiled, and said, light but sharp, "Mom, you don't have to worry about that. Cole and I will get coffee out. You should rest." The door closed, leaving 2 cups of tea to go cold. I sat down and watched the steam disappear, my heart feeling hollow. A neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, once stopped by and saw me sweeping the porch. She said, "Mrs. Lila, the house is lively now, but why do I rarely see them talk with you?" I forced a smile. "Young people are busy, Mrs. Peterson. They have their own lives." It sounded calm, but only I knew how tight my throat felt saying it. At night, I sat in Edward's old armchair, watching the living room light leak through the door crack. I could hear them talking, laughing, sometimes discussing remodel plans. "Once," Alyssa said, "if we knock out the wall by the room at the end of the hall, the bedroom will be bigger. The room at the end of the hall, my room." I heard Cole answer softly, "It's okay. Mom will want her own place eventually." My chest tightened, but I still didn't cry. I just clasped my hands together like I was holding on to the last of my dignity. I used to think love was the strongest bond, but love can rot in silence like an old boat that doesn't split open, just slowly takes on water until it sinks. I chose silence because I was afraid of losing my son. I was afraid that speaking up would crack everything beyond repair. I didn't realize that one person's silence is often mistaken by others as consent. And that supposed consent made them believe they could say and do anything, even lock me in a bathroom for 2 full days, inside a house where every brick bears my fingerprints. On the first autumn evening after their wedding, I flipped on the hallway light like always. With age, my eyesight has faded, so when I go to the kitchen at night, I leave a small lamp on a soft yellow glow that keeps me from tripping. But that night, the light snapped off the moment I stepped out. From the living room, Alyssa's voice came steady and cold. "Electricity isn't free, Mom." I froze. The words weren't loud, but they fell into my ears like steady drops on stone, not strong enough to break it, but sharp enough to sting. I smiled faintly, telling myself she was just reminding me. I didn't respond, just slipped back to my bed, an emptiness I couldn't explain spreading inside me. The next morning, I made tea early. The water was warm, not hot like usual. I tried to turn up the heater but realized the temperature had been lowered. When I asked, Alyssa just smiled. "I adjusted it to save energy, Mom. Good for the environment." I nodded and didn't argue. I like saving too. But in her voice I heard something else, as if I'd been lectured, not included. Little things like that kept popping up, like pebbles tossed into a still pond. I folded their bath towels. Alyssa opened them, refolded, and said gently, "Mom, these should be folded in thirds, not halves." I loaded the washer. She told me I used the wrong amount of water. I started the dishwasher. She frowned. "Mom, plates should go in straight rows, not at an angle. The water won't reach evenly." Each time, I apologized, smiled, and said, "I'll remember." I thought I was keeping the peace, but the way Alyssa nodded, pursed her lips, and turned away made me feel like a clumsy housemaid, not the homeowner. That night, as I passed the hall, I overheard them in the kitchen. "She still thinks this is her house." Alyssa's voice wasn't overtly mean, just tired. But that "still thinks" sliced deep. I leaned against the wall and swallowed hard. I wanted to walk in, smile, and say, "Yes, it is my house." But I couldn't. I just stood there, listening to pans clatter and sauce simmer, then went back to my room and closed the door softly. The next morning, I went to the yard. I cut the grass, wiped the patio table, and replaced the faucet gasket, little jobs Edward used to do. Sweat stuck to my shirt and my hands ached, but in the work I felt useful. When Alyssa came home, I greeted her with a smile and said, "I changed the leaky kitchen gasket so the water runs stronger now." She gave a short reply. "Oh, Mom, you don't need to do that. We were going to call a repairman." Then she headed straight upstairs. I stood there looking at my hands' thin, calloused fingers, nails stained with rubber dust. I didn't understand why my kindness now seemed to annoy people. I realized Alyssa had started setting little rules. First it was lights, then water, then food. She said, "Mom, don't buy whole milk anymore. Cole and I only drink almond. Please get your own kind so there's no mix-ups." I nodded. I only need a little milk for my morning tea, but that "so there's no mix-ups" felt like a label slapped on me. Another day, she taped a sheet to the fridge. "House rules: keep it clean, save resources, respect personal space." At the bottom were both their signatures. I stared at that paper for a long time. It didn't mention me, but it felt like it was speaking directly to me. Cole was the same, silent. His silence had its own tone. Not indifference, but compromise. Every time I tried to bring something up, he just smiled. "Mom, Alyssa worries about small stuff. Don't take it to heart." I couldn't tell whether to be sad that my son wouldn't defend me or sad that he thought I was too weak to defend myself. I started storing everything in my memory, each look, each tone, each sigh. Not to hold a grudge, but to stop lying to myself that things would get better. I've spent years waiting for things to get better, and I know that if you don't stop the bad, it only gets worse. One evening, Alyssa invited friends over for dinner. I wasn't told ahead of time. When I came downstairs, she'd already set the table, scented candles burning, soft jazz playing. I smiled and said, "Oh, a party? Let me help set up." She shook her head, still smiling. "No need, Mom. Please relax, we've got it." I turned away, but as I reached the stairs, I heard one of her friends whisper, "You live with your mother-in-law?" Alyssa laughed, a hint of mockery. "Yeah, but she's so gentle you almost don't notice she's around." The group burst out laughing. I froze on the step, hand gripping the banister. "Almost don't notice she's around" sounded like a compliment, but it smelled of erasure. After the party, they laughed and talked late into the night. I couldn't sleep. I heard glasses clinking, high heels tapping on the wood floor. I remembered parties years ago, when Cole's friends came over and I baked cookies, poured lemonade, laughter ringing through the house. Now, all I heard was my own breathing in a small room, the hallway light still off. The next morning I went to the kitchen and found the table full of dirty glasses. I washed them all and wiped everything spotless, leaving no trace. When Alyssa woke up, she looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to do that. I was going to clean up." I just smiled. "It's okay, I'm used to getting up early." But from then on, I started watching everything I did. If I did the laundry, she'd redo it. If I cooked something, she'd say they already ate out. I was turning into a shadow in my own house. Another night, I heard Cole and Alyssa talking in the living room. The door wasn't fully closed, and I clearly heard Alyssa say, "I just feel uncomfortable with her staying here forever. This is our home, but everything still feels arranged by her. Even the way it smells is hers." Cole answered softly, "I know, but I don't want to hurt my mom." Alyssa let out a light laugh. "Hurt her? She probably doesn't even notice." I went back to my room and shut the door. I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry, but something inside me, a small, quiet part, snapped. The next day, I stopped turning on the hallway light. I walked in the dark, one hand tracing the wall. I didn't want to hear "electricity isn't free" again. I didn't run the water heater too long, didn't fold towels the way I always had, didn't use scented fabric softener. I lived like a renter, tiptoeing in the very house I paid for. But from that point on, something else began to form in me, a clear, alert record. I remembered not to resent, but to stop deceiving myself with Alyssa's just tired or Cole's stuck in the middle. No, I understood. People who've been loved too much often never learn to value it. I looked back at what I'd done, gifting the house, cooking, quietly helping, and realized my overkindness might have taught them they had the right to look down on me. I didn't react, argue, or raise my voice. I simply noted every sign of contempt, like someone collecting evidence even they don't yet realize they're producing. Because deep down, I knew every slight, no matter how small, is a warning before the storm. And I, Lila Whitmore, had started to hear the wind rise. That afternoon, the wind swept through the backyard, carrying the smell of dry leaves and damp soil. I stood by the wooden fence, rubber mallet in hand, trying to replace a few warped boards after last week's rain. Fall in Virginia always has a sneaky chill, not enough to bite but enough to swell the joints so that every strike of the nail sent a sting up my wrist. I worked slowly, carefully, the way Edward used to. He always told me, "Don't let things sit broken too long. Lila, fix them while you can." When I set the last board, the sun had slipped behind the trees, leaving a wash of pale orange across the ground. The wind turned sharper, my back burned, my calloused hands stiffened. I took a deep breath, inhaled the scent of fresh-cut wood, and went inside. My whole body ached, sweat and dust clinging to my shirt. All I could think about was a hot shower to loosen my tight shoulders. The bathroom was small, steam fogging the mirror quickly. I turned on the warm water and stood still, letting it run down my back slowly, like it was washing away months of silence layered over the house. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps growing heavy in the hall. The first pounding hit like thunder. "How much longer, Mom?" Alyssa's voice cold and sharp as steel. I startled and answered through the steam, "Just a moment, I'm almost done." No reply, only a sigh. Then a few seconds later, it came the dry, decisive sound of the lock turning from the outside. I spun around, wet hands shaking on the knob. I pulled hard. Nothing. I called out, "Alyssa, what's going on?" "Open the door." Silence. Only the TV from the living room, silverware clinking, laughter. I called louder, this time to Cole. "Cole, do you hear me? Open the door for Mom." No answer. Just a short laugh, then a sitcom theme swelling. I pounded the door over and over, only to get the dull clank of metal in return. The door felt colder than the water on my skin. I stood still, chest heaving, stunned and disbelieving. For a moment I wanted to think it was a mistake, a prank, or some lesson they thought I needed. But minute after long minute, I knew this wasn't a joke. I wrapped the towel around me and sat on the floor. The tile was freezing, damp soaking through the towel and into my bones. I listened to them chat outside Alyssa's even tone, Cole's responses like nothing was happening. Every laugh sliced through the trust I'd spent a lifetime protecting. I shouted a few more times. Then I went quiet. Silence wasn't a choice anymore, it was survival. I leaned my head back against the wall, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe slowly. I thought of Edward, of my years as a single mother, of the promise I made long ago. I vowed my son would never go without, never imagined I would be starved and locked up by that very child. Now I understood the cruelest betrayal isn't shouting, it's absolute indifference. That first night, all I had was the cold trickle from the faucet. I drank a few sips, the metallic tang sharp and bitter. Hunger twisted my stomach, but I didn't knock again. I sat still, listening to the fridge door close, footsteps passing by. They went to bed. The whole house fell silent. I curled up on the tile, my back throbbing, my heartbeat fading. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the pipes reminded me I was being held. Once I heard Cole walk by, keys jingling, then stop outside the bathroom. I thought he would open the door. He didn't. A few seconds of quiet, then his footsteps drifted away. By morning, a sliver of light slipped under the door. My head felt heavy, lips dry, hands shaking. I forced myself up and looked in the mirror, hair a mess, hollow cheeks, red eyes. I gave a thin smile. A mother locked in her own house. Who would believe it? I called out again. No response. I heard dishes, smelled coffee drifting in through the crack. Then the front door slammed. They left for work. I was alone with the silence. The bathroom became my whole world, small, cramped, and cold. I had no clock, so I counted time by my heartbeat and the number of cars passing outside. By noon, I slid to the floor, dizzy with hunger. I pressed my forehead to the cold wall and closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Alyssa's words from the day before looped in my head. She still thinks this is her house. Yes, I did think so. Maybe that's exactly why I was being kept like an intruder. By evening, I heard them return, the door opening, footsteps, then familiar laughter. I wanted to scream, to pound the door until my hands bled, but I didn't. I stayed still. There's no point explaining to people who don't want to hear. On the second night, my stomach growled in waves. I drank from the tap to dull the hunger. Wind hissed through the tiny window above, cold air raising goosebumps on my skin. I trembled, but didn't cry. I thought how strange it is that people become clearest when pushed to their limits. I remembered the factory days when I was young, hands raw and still smiling, thinking as long as my boy was okay, it was enough. I'd lived my whole life for other people and never thought about defending myself. But here, in this mildewed bathroom, I understood. If I didn't stand up and reclaim my dignity, all those years would mean nothing. When I closed my eyes, I saw Edward in my mind. He stood by the fence, smiling. "Lila, don't let anyone treat you like you don't matter." I opened my eyes. My palms were cold, but my heart felt strangely warm. I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't beg. I didn't pound the door. I let time pass, let them think I'd surrendered. In the silence, I made a plan. If they used a lock to teach me to save, I would use the law to teach them limits. I started observing the time the door opened each morning, the jingle of keys on the table, when they left, when their steps returned at night. I stored every detail in my head. I would need it later. On the morning of the third day, the lock clicked again, this time in reverse. The door cracked and light slipped in. Alyssa appeared, phone in hand, her voice casual like nothing had happened. "Next time, don't waste water, Mom." She turned away without waiting for an answer. Cole stood in the living room with his back to me. No look, no concern. I stepped out, water dripping from my hair, feet freezing on the floor. I walked past them like a ghost, back to my room, and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers touching the old safe key. The first feeling wasn't anger, it was clarity. A frightening kind of clarity, the kind that lets you see exactly where the limits of your tolerance end. I don't know how long I sat there. I only know that when the morning light slanted through the curtain, I had a clear decision. There would not be a second time. I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't cry, wouldn't tell the neighbors, wouldn't beg Cole to realize his mistake. I used to believe in family ties, but from now on, I believe in justice. If they think they can lock me up in this house, they've forgotten the owner of this house is still me. On the third morning, the lock turned with a short, dry, decisive click. The door opened and light rushed in, making me blink. The early chill swept into the bathroom, mixed with the smell of old soap and mildew. Alyssa stood in the doorway, hair tied back, phone in hand, voice even and flat. "Next time, don't waste water, Mom." No guilty look. No apology, just a sentence that fell light as dust and heavy as lead. Cole stood behind her, leaning on the wall, eyes glued to the TV. As I walked past, he didn't look up or say a word. For a second, I saw his hand clench the remote, knuckles white, and then release like nothing happened. I didn't speak, didn't look, didn't let them see a drop of water on my face. I wrapped the towel tight, walked down the long hallway, each step on the cold floor, feeling like I was leaving a prison. I didn't look back. No one deserved to see my eyes then, not angry, not hurt, but utterly indifferent. In my room, I sat down, opened the small drawer. The safe key lay still in my palm, its dull metallic shine catching the morning light. That cold metal felt like it was breathing with me. I took a deep breath and felt my heartbeat slow and steady. I pulled a small sheet of paper from the desk and carefully wrote 5 lines, neat and firm. 1. Confirm ownership. 2. Call the lawyer. 3. Find a discreet buyer. 4. Create my own account. 5. Disappear. I folded the paper in half and tucked it into Edward's old notebook between 2 yellowed pages. It wasn't a revenge list. It was a survival plan. That morning, I made tea like usual. Alyssa and Cole ate in silence, spoons tapping porcelain with a sound like metal scraping glaze. I set the kettle on the table and asked, "Cole, it's cold today. Remember your coat?" He just nodded, eyes never leaving his phone. Alyssa sipped her coffee, glanced at me, and looked away. "No, thank you." I still smiled, calm as if nothing had happened. The chill in that house no longer came from the weather, but from the silence of 3 people living together with no connection left. By day, I did everything the same, watering plants, wiping tables, washing dishes. I let the water run just enough, turned lights on and off exactly on schedule, earlier than usual. I followed their rules perfectly, because I understood, if you want to leave quietly, you first play the role of the compliant one. At noon, when they left for work, I shut my door and drew the curtains. I opened the safe, the lock clicked. Soft but loud in the stillness. Inside were the things I'd kept for years: the house title, Edward's life insurance policy, savings book, and several bank statements I'd hidden well, all in my name, clearly signed, fully legal. I held the property certificate in my palm and stared at the bold letters, Lila Whitmore, my signature. At the bottom, strong and even dated nearly 20 years ago, a feeling both wry and peaceful rose in my chest. All these years they lived in my house, but it never truly belonged to them. I read every page, missing nothing. The deed, property tax papers, fire insurance, bank agreements, everything in order. I even found a copy of Edward's old insurance policy. I thought it was lost. In the margin, he had once written a small note by hand, "For Lila, who knows the value of effort more than anyone." I touched that line lightly. A small smile came to my lips, not happiness, but the smile of someone who's found her backbone again. By afternoon, I walked to the post office. On the way, leafless trees shook in the wind, and my shoes knocked against the pavement, slow but steady. I emailed Edward's old lawyer. He was still alive, still working at a small office near the courthouse. I didn't explain everything, just wrote briefly, "I want to reconfirm the property ownership registered in 2005. Please check it for me as soon as possible." That evening, I got home before they did and cooked a small pot of chicken soup, fragrant with celery and black pepper. When Alyssa walked in, she seemed surprised by the smell but said nothing. I set 3 bowls on the table and invited them. The silence stretched so long I could hear each tick of the wall clock. I ate slowly without looking at them. With every spoonful, I felt a sheet of ice forming in my chest, cold but firm. Night fell, they shut their door, and I opened the safe again. I took out my small notebook and added details to the plan. 1. Call the lawyer back after his response. 2. Contact the discreet broker, the one who sold Mrs. Peterson's old house. 3. Check the limits for international transfers. 4. Open a separate account under my maiden name, Lila Moore. I paused, staring at the 4 lines, pen still in hand. A tear fell onto the page, not from sadness, but because freedom had begun to sprout. In the days that followed, I kept living as if nothing had changed. I still smiled when I saw them, still asked Cole, "Work okay, son?" Still answered, "Sleep well," when Alyssa tossed out a quick goodnight. But inside, I was no longer the woman afraid to bother anyone, afraid to upset her son. I had become an observer, quiet and clear. On the 4th morning, I received a reply from the law office. The ownership verification was freshly stamped, clearly listing me as the sole owner of the house. I folded it and slipped it into my purse. In that moment, I felt a strange peace, not the thrill of victory, but the calm of someone who has taken back control of her life. That evening, when Alyssa opened the fridge and complained, "Why did you buy so much milk?" I simply answered, "I'm used to it. It'll be gone soon." She didn't realize there was another meaning in it. Soon wasn't just the milk, it was everything between us. Late at night, I tidied my room. I gathered a few essentials: the photo album, Edward's wedding ring, a small jewelry box, a few important papers. I packed everything into a small suitcase, then sat by the bed and listened to the wind at the window frame. In the quiet, I saw something simple. The moment they locked me in the bathroom, they didn't just imprison my body, they unlocked someone else in me. Someone who knows blind patience isn't a virtue, it's self-bondage. Someone who understands some battles don't need shouting, only a signature at the right time. I sat still, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The warm yellow light fell across my face, lines deep around my eyes. But this time I didn't look tired. I saw a woman who had finally woken up after a decades-long sleep. I smiled and placed a hand over my chest, feeling a slow, strong heartbeat. In my mind, the 5 steps glowed as clearly as the old hallway light I once turned off to keep others comfortable. Now I switched it back on, just to light the way for myself. 2 days later, I put on a light gray wool coat, wrapped a dark scarf, and stepped out at 8 a.m. January wind in Virginia sliced through, stinging my cheeks like a reminder. Stay sharp, don't tremble. I called a cab to the law office where Edward had worked with Mr. Harold Benson, the man who helped us write our will, buy the house, and keep our documents straight for 20 years. When I walked in, Mr. Benson looked up, surprised. The same kind face, hair nearly all white, thin glasses slipping down his nose. "My goodness, Lila Whitmore, it's been a long time," he said, voice rough but warm. "Edward would be smiling somewhere, knowing you've kept everything this orderly." I gave a small smile and set the file on his desk. "I need you to reconfirm the house ownership. And I may need help selling it quietly." His eyes shifted, not in surprise but in understanding. He opened the file and read every page carefully. After a few minutes, he nodded. Everything's clean and fully in your name. I'll arrange a private transaction, no sign, no public listing. Just a few weeks to complete. I exhaled lightly, like a knot had been loosened from my throat. He looked up with a half smile. I don't need to know what happened, but if you're going to leave, leave with your head high, and make sure no one knows the closing date. I nodded. That's exactly what I'll do. Leaving the law office, I stopped by the bank. No one paid attention to an older woman with a small purse and a steady gaze. I opened a brand new account entirely in my name, with only my signature authorized. The clerk asked, "Would you like to link it to your existing accounts?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, thank you. This one is for personal matters." I also requested a small trust account overseas and moved a portion of Edward's old insurance into it, enough to live comfortably for years, but not so much that anyone at home would be suspicious if they saw a statement. From that day on, every morning I withdrew a small amount of cash, no more than $500, just enough to look like ordinary spending. I tucked it into envelopes and hid them at the bottom of my suitcase, cushioned by old sweaters. I once read that when you want to disappear without notice, the key isn't where you go, it's leaving quietly, in steps so reasonable no one notices. I came home as if I'd just run errands. Alyssa was watering plants on the porch. She saw me and said, "Mom, out early today?" I answered lightly. "Went to the bank to pay the car insurance." She just said, "Uh-huh," and turned away. No more questions. Everything went on like that, quiet, steady like a clock. I kept my old routine. Coffee at 7 a.m., watering orchids at 10 a.m., cooking my own meals in the afternoon. I showed them nothing unusual. If anything had changed, it was only the calm in my voice. Every evening, Alyssa chatted on the phone in the kitchen. She often mentioned remodel plans. One day, while I was stacking dishes, she said to someone offhand, "Probably this summer we'll gut the kitchen. That wall is ancient." I froze. Gut the kitchen? The kitchen where I spent thousands of mornings cooking for my husband and son, where a tiny burn mark still sits on the counter from when Cole baked at 10 years old. I looked at Alyssa, nodded, and said softly, "That's fine, as long as you like it." She didn't know that every time she said gut, I heard the crack of the past breaking. That night in my room, I opened the safe and checked the documents again. I added one more line to the plan. Day 18, sign the sale contract. Day 21, transfer complete. Day 24, leave. 3 weeks. Only 3 weeks left. I closed the safe, locked it, then sat on the bed, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. I looked around the small room. Each item I'd bought with my own hands, the purple floral curtains Edward chose, our wedding photo, the vase of dried flowers by the window. I knew that soon I would leave it all. Instead of sadness, I felt light. The next day, when Cole went to work, Alyssa sat in the living room with her laptop open, searching for kitchen inspo. She called me over in a syrupy voice. "Mom, do you think these tiles match?" I love that Scandinavian white and gray look, so classy. I looked at the screen, a gleaming, unfamiliar kitchen with no warmth at all. I nodded. "It's pretty, Alyssa. It suits you too." Inside, a different smile bloomed, the smile of someone watching others paint on a board that's about to be wiped clean. That evening, Cole talked about a Hawaii vacation. He was excited, said he'd take 2 weeks off and bring Alyssa along, "So you can rest at home." I answered, "Great idea. I'll watch the house." They both smiled and thanked me. They had no idea the day they boarded that plane would be the day I left their lives. I began moving in order, like a chess game. Every move calculated, no rushing, no missteps. I tidied my room, tossed unneeded papers, destroyed old bills that could reveal information. I took a few items to the charity shop, part habit, part making space in my luggage. On the 8th morning, I got a confirmation email. The house sale contract has been prepared. All procedures are legal. Waiting only for the signing date. I read it 3 times, then deleted the message, leaving no trace. That night, I sat in the dark living room with only one small lamp on. Alyssa and Cole were arguing about savings, but their voices faded. It all sounded like echoes from another world, the one I was about to leave. I sipped cold tea, watching the lamplight reflected on the wooden table, oddly indifferent. Every feeling, hurt, anger, bitterness, seemed to have frozen into a clear sheet of ice. On the outside, I looked like any other elderly mother. On the inside, I was counting moves in a silent game. I knew their habits precisely: when they left, when they returned, when the TV went on, when they slept. I learned to walk so lightly the floor wouldn't creak, to speak just enough so they'd think I was still obedient. A woman once locked in a bathroom for 2 days now held the controls again, and no one noticed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one finishing the game with precise moves. When Alyssa showed off the new kitchen render and Cole went on about Hawaii, I just nodded. Inside, I smiled a discreet, cool smile because I knew they were investing effort into a house that, in only 3 weeks, wouldn't be theirs. 3 weeks. 3 weeks for me to play the kind mother, the calm grandmother. 3 weeks to prepare for closing that door one last time, this time from the outside. One late February morning, fog veiled the road as I rode a taxi to the law office. Cold air slid through the window crack, carrying the usual metallic scent of traffic. I looked out the glass as bare trees slipped by, my heart strangely calm. After so many years, I was finally doing what I should have done long ago, deciding my own life. Attorney Harold greeted me with a small smile and a knowing nod. "That young couple is very discreet," he said. "Paying cash, no loan. I've checked their background, decent and trustworthy." I simply said, "I trust you." On the desk, the file was neatly stacked, not a single extra page. Everything had been reviewed: ownership verification, transfer contract, property handover documents. He handed me a pen with glossy black ink and said slowly, "All I need is your signature here, Lila. After today, this house will no longer be connected to you." I looked at the printed name, Lila Whitmore, bold and straight. My hand trembled slightly, not from doubt, but because years of bottled emotions were about to be released. I set the pen down and signed clean and decisive. As the pen lifted from the paper, I felt like I'd just closed a book I'd been reading too long, so long I'd forgotten I could put it down. "The transaction will be complete within 72 hours, Harold said, carefully gathering the documents. "The funds will go straight to your account. I'll hold the keys and hand them to the buyers the very morning you leave." I nodded. "Thank you, Harold. And please don't inform anyone." "Of course," he replied, quiet but firm. Disappearing deserves the same protection as privacy. When I stepped outside, the sun had broken through. Light touched my silver hair, and everything felt feather-light. I paused on the sidewalk, watched people hurry by, then walked into the cafe across the street. A hot cappuccino arrived, foam thick and smooth. I took a sip. The sweet bitterness slid down my throat. For the first time in years, I felt a morning that truly belonged to me. By afternoon, I was home. Alyssa was on the phone. Cole was sprawled on the couch. I smiled and walked past like any other day. No one noticed a thing. In my room, I opened my laptop and searched for a faraway coastal town, Mariners Bay, Oregon. A small, quiet place with a green bay and rows of wooden houses. I read the description: "A town of wind, where people come to start over." I chose an early morning flight one way, no return. I booked a small seaside room, a pale blue house with a white porch, less than 100 yards from the sand. The owner, a middle-aged woman, messaged back warmly, "Your room will be ready. Just bring the sunshine." I smiled. It had been a long time since anyone said something so kind to me. That night, while they watched TV, I slipped into my room and opened the wardrobe. The old suitcase brown leather, the one Edward bought when we were poor, lay at the bottom. I wiped off the dust, opened it, and folded each item slowly. A few simple outfits, a wool sweater, walking shoes, and the small wooden box holding Edward's wedding ring. I placed it on top, the final keepsake of a lifetime. I added an envelope of cash and a small document pouch with what I needed: passport, insurance paperwork, bank statements, everything fit snugly inside. I pulled the zipper, the small click sounding both familiar and new, like fate snapping shut. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. The room where I slept after my husband died, where I held my feverish boy through the night, where I believed love could conquer anything. Now it was just a temporary stop. I felt no regret, only lightness. I texted the woman at the corner grocery, Mrs. Peterson, who always set aside a small bottle of milk for me in the mornings. "Thank you for your kindness all these years. If I ever come back, I'll stop by." I didn't mention the date. I wanted this goodbye to have no farewell. That night, I lay listening to the wind slip through the window. Branches tapped the frame, the clock ticked, and from the next room the TV murmured on. I closed my eyes. No anger, no regret. Only a calm as still as water before dawn. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made coffee and carefully left 2 cups for them on the table, an old habit. I watched light filter through the curtains, dust floating in the air, and knew everything was closing. I called the taxi I'd booked and confirmed the flight. The ticket was already in my coat pocket. I wrote a short note, folded it, and placed it in the drawer beside the family photo. "Thank you for the years that were once warm. Don't look for me because I've found myself." I didn't sign my name. At noon, when Alyssa and Cole went out, I sat in the living room and looked around one last time. Sunlight fell on the walls where I once hung Cole's birthday photos, where Edward's laughter used to echo. I ran my hand across the wooden table, like saying goodbye to the past. I picked up the phone and called Harold. "I've signed. The handover date stays the same, right?" "That's right," he said. "I'll pass the keys to the buyers the very morning you leave." "Good," I said evenly. "Then it's done." I hung up and looked around again. Sparrows chirped on the porch. I smiled, a rare, genuine smile not meant for anyone to see. That night I put everything in order. I turned off all the lights, leaving only the hallway nightlight, the very light I'd once been scolded for as wasting electricity. It felt warm now, like a small sign seeing me off. When I lay down, my hand brushed the wedding ring in the suitcase. I closed my eyes and told myself, tomorrow morning I'm going. No looking back. I didn't dream. I only heard the far-off sound of wind, like the sea whispering the place waiting for me, where I would start again without having to prove anything to anyone. The most beautiful parting, I think, is leaving quietly, no explanations, no blame. Because those who hurt us will never understand the cruelest thing isn't revenge, it's disappearing when they still think you'll always be there. Dawn hadn't broken yet. The first light of day still slept behind the trees. I woke in silence, as if my body knew it was a special day. No alarm, no birds, only the sound of my own breathing, slow and steady. I sat up and gently pulled back the curtain. Outside, the street lay under a film of mist. The yellow streetlights hadn't turned off yet. Everything felt strangely peaceful, as if the world didn't know that in just a few hours an old mother would vanish from the house that once was her heart. I brewed tea, not coffee. I wanted to be clear but light. Steam rose, mint filling the quiet kitchen. I looked around the dining table, the stove, the chair where Edward used to fix his radio, so familiar, so dear, that I knew I had to leave now or I never would. When the clock struck 5 a.m., I opened the safe, took the envelope with the house keys, and sealed it carefully. I wrote one short line on the front, to Mr. Harold. Thank you for helping me close this chapter. I set the envelope on the table beside the small vase I'd arranged the night before, white orchids, my favorite. The hallway light shone across, brightening petals thin as mist. A simple scene, but enough to soften my farewell. I checked the suitcase, compact, worn, holding the rest of my life. Papers, a few clothes, the wedding ring, the photo of me with Edward and Cole when my boy was small. Everything set like a ritual. I drew the zipper. The click echoed in the quiet, like sealing fate. I put on a heavy coat and a knit scarf, then opened my door. The hallway was dark, only a sliver of light slipping from my son's room. Cole's soft snore, Alyssa's faint rustle. I paused, not from doubt, but from an old habit, making sure my loved ones were still sleeping. I didn't open their door. I just stood in the dark, listening to their breathing like a distant tide. Strangely, I felt no anger, only a quiet compassion for the version of me who believed for years that love could heal ingratitude. I looked around the hallway where the family photo still hung, the picture of me, Edward, and Cole at his graduation. In it, I'm smiling. Edward's hand rests on our son's shoulder, and Cole is looking straight at the camera, confident, bright, full of future. I touched the frame lightly, my fingertips trembling. Not from sadness, but from knowing that sometimes the beauty of a memory should only be kept in silence. I walked to the front door. The keys had already been left behind, so the lock was empty now. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, took a deep breath, then turned for one last look. The house was dark, except for the hallway light I'd intentionally left on. That light had once been switched off for saving electricity, but today I turned it on, not to light my way, but to remind the house that it once belonged to someone who was grateful for every brick. I smiled. Then I gently pulled the door closed. The sound was so soft it was like the last breath of a dream ending. I stood on the porch and drew in a long breath. The cold air rushed into my lungs and made me shiver, but in that chill there was a taste of freedom, the taste of early morning, of beginnings that don't need proof. At the end of the lane, the taxi was waiting. Its yellow lights glowed against the mist, a small halo in the dark. I rolled my suitcase. The wheels clicked lightly over the tiles, a steady tap-tap. Each step was a beat of farewell. I passed the flower bed where Edward once planted lavender he brought back from Tennessee. The bare, dry stems stood patiently through winter, as if they were seeing me off. At the gate, I turned my head once. Not to look, but to remember what it feels like to leave without regret. I didn't see the house, only a blur of mist around it. The hallway light spilled out faintly, like a flame about to go out. I knew once the sun rose, that light would be swallowed. But it didn't matter, what needed to be bright was already bright inside me. I walked to the car, opened the door, and sat down. The driver, a brown-skinned man with a deep voice, glanced back and asked, "Airport, right?" I nodded. "That's right. And please don't look back." He smiled lightly and asked nothing more. The car began to move. Through the window, the little street slid past, rooftops faded, then disappeared into the fog. I rested my hand on the suitcase and felt the warmth of the leather. In my mind, there was no house, no Alyssa, no Cole. Only one thought. Everything worth looking at is ahead. The highway opened up, streetlights dimming as dawn spread. I saw a blush of pink spilling across the horizon, the gentle light I'd waited for years. This time, I didn't have to wait for someone to wake me, didn't have to cook breakfast for anyone, didn't have to fear someone locking my door. I leaned back and let the wind slip in through the window crack. Dew on the glass caught the morning light, sparkling like tiny pieces of freedom. I closed my eyes and listened to the low hum of the engine like a steady heartbeat. A chapter had closed. I didn't know how long I would live in that coastal town, or whether Cole would ever look for me. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. because for the first time in decades, I didn't belong to anyone and no one had the right to claim me. As the car crossed the bridge, I saw the sun lift on the far side. Bright light spread across the sky, washing the water below in pink. I smiled. Leaving before dawn might be the gentlest way to end a life of entanglement. No one saw me go, no one sent me off, no one held me back, and I didn't need anyone. The trip began. No looking back. That morning, while I was on a flight headed for the Oregon coast, clouds floating below like cotton on the other side of the country, in the house I once called home, the doorbell rang 3 times. Cole stumbled out of the bedroom, hair messy, eyes still sleepy. Alyssa, wrapped in a robe with a coffee cup in hand, wore a scowl from being woken early. At the door stood a moving crew and a young couple, the man in glasses and a gray shirt, the woman in a beige dress holding a file folder. "Hello, we're the Reeds," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Per attorney Harold Benson's schedule, today is the handover." The living room air froze. Cole's eyes went wide, and Alyssa slammed her cup down so hard coffee splashed onto the wood floor. "Handover of what?" Cole rasped. "This property has completed the transfer," the man replied calmly. "We're the new owners. Here's a notarized copy of the contract." Alyssa snatched the papers and flipped through them quickly. At the bottom, my clean, familiar signature stood out. Lila Whitmore. Below it, the legal stamp with dates matching last week. No one spoke for a few seconds. Only the soft whir of the HVAC and the tick of the clock filled a room beginning to crack. Cole stammered, No way. This is my mother's house. We live here. There must be some mistake." The man with glasses answered evenly, "There's no mistake, sir. The paperwork is valid. The transaction is complete. Attorney Benson confirms all ownership has been transferred. Today is the handover, per the contract." Alyssa's face flushed crimson. She turned to her husband, voice pitching high. "Say something. How is this possible? The house is in your mom's name." Cole went silent. In his head, pieces of memory linked together the calm in my eyes, the long silences, the times I held documents without explaining, and especially that morning I woke early to make coffee and then disappeared. He rushed into the office, opened the laptop, and logged into the bank. The screen lit up. The balance in the account under Lila Whitmore was empty. The transaction history showed a large transfer out with a cold note attached. Final settlement closed. Alyssa ran through the house, yanking drawers, opening the safe. Empty. Nothing left, not even the documents they'd once hidden from me. Everything that mattered, the deed, insurance, certificates, was gone with me. Alyssa's scream echoed down the hall. "Where's the safe? Where is the safe?" Cole stood frozen, staring at the wall where the small safe used to sit, now just a square of lighter dust. His phone started ringing nonstop. An unknown number. He answered, voice shaking. "Hello, this is Cole Whitmore." A calm, professional voice replied, "Hello, I'm the secretary for attorney Harold Benson. We received your inquiry. I'm calling to confirm all transactions related to the property at 43 Maple Avenue are complete. By law, the home is now owned by Every 43, the Reed family. Mrs. Lila Whitmore was the lawful seller." Cole hung up. In that moment, his world fell apart in silence. The mother he thought only knew how to endure, to stay quiet, had left not with noise or blame, but with a legal signature colder than any anger. Alyssa sank into a chair, hands clutching her head. "The kitchen deposit, $5,000, Cole." "What are we going to do?" Cole didn't answer. He walked to the window and looked out. The movers were carrying the young couple's furniture inside. Each piece crossing the threshold felt like a slap to his pride. He remembered Alyssa mocking me, the night she locked me in the bathroom, the times she said, "This is our house, not hers." Now the house wasn't theirs at all except for me, the one who chose to let it go at the right time. The new owner stepped into the living room and said politely, "We understand your surprise. But the contract is clear. Please arrange to move your belongings within 2 days. If you need more time, we can offer a temporary 2-week rental at a reduced rate." Alyssa turned pale. And Cole, for the first time, was truly silent. Not the detached silence he once used on me, but the silence of someone who realizes he's lost control. Back at the law office, Mr. Harold sent an email with the contract copy attached, and a brief note. "Transaction is legal and irreversible. Any appeals must be filed through official channels. Mrs. Lila Whitmore has not provided contact information. There was no one left to call, no one to plead with. Cole's phone showed dozens of outgoing calls, all to one number. Mine. He called again and again. But on the other end, no one picked up. Only an automated voice, warm but distant. The number you have dialed is not reachable at this time." Alyssa threw her phone on the table, voice breaking. "She's crazy." "She can't do this," Cole answered softly, as if to himself. "She can, and she did." The empty house echoed with their footsteps, the clatter of disturbed things, doors slamming. All those sounds were nothing but background music for their late lesson. Somewhere else, I was sitting on the balcony of a small room overlooking the bay. Noon sunlight winked on the water, gulls circling in flocks. My phone buzzed. Cole's name lit the screen. 1, 2, 3, then 10 calls. I didn't touch it. I let it ring, then fall quiet. In that silence, I heard the waves clearly, gentle and steady. Some apologies only matter when the listener is still there. After they leave, everything is just wind. I sipped my tea and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but the smile of someone who has taken back control of her life. In the old house, Cole and Alyssa finally dropped onto the floor, exhausted. Alyssa turned on the faucet to wash her hands. Cold water trickled weakly. She twisted the handle to hot, and a small click sounded in the pipes. Such a tiny sound, but it startled them both. Maybe in that instant, they remembered me, the woman once locked in a bathroom, shivering in a wet towel, listening to water drip by the second. And now, every time they turn on the hot water, that click will echo as a reminder that the former controllers have lost control for good. I lifted my head toward the sea, shimmering in the late light, the breeze combing through my silver hair. Everything was settled. No need for revenge, no noise. Sometimes justice is simply leaving at the right time, letting those who remain face the emptiness they created. The coastal town welcomed me with salt on the air and cool wind, a scent only those who have stood at the ocean's edge truly know. The taxi stopped at the top of a gentle slope. Below was a row of white-painted wooden houses, windows thrown open to the morning sun, and at the end of the road, the sea spread out like a giant mirror reflecting the sky. I rolled my suitcase down, its wheels clicked over gravel, a crisp, steady rhythm, like a new breath. The innkeeper, a middle-aged woman with brown hair, a sturdy build, and a kind smile greeted me warmly. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore. Your room's on the second floor, window straight to the bay. I've set out warm blankets and a kettle." The room wasn't large, but it was quiet enough to hear waves breaking on the shore. Cream-painted wood walls, light slipping through white curtains, touching the small table beside the bed. I opened the window and let the wind in, carrying gull cries and the raw tang of salt. On the little wooden table, I placed Edward's photo, the frame I'd brought from the old house. In it, he smiles gently, pale blue eyes shining with the rare patience of a man who's known a lifetime of work and loss. I touched the glass and whispered, "I'm here, Edward. At last, I've learned to stand up on my own." The next morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, sparkling like shards of golden glass. I brewed coffee, not the cheap instant I used to drink, but lightly roasted beans ground fresh. The aroma filled the room and mingled with the sea breeze, a new scent that felt strangely comforting. I went to the fish market at the dock, where sun-browned men hauled nets and rinsed fish under cold water. An old fisherman, hair white as sea foam, smiled at me. "New around here? Want to try halibut or fresh salmon?" I laughed and misnamed a few fish, making him chuckle. The next day, he saved me the best cut and said, "For Mrs. Whitmore, now you know what to pick." Day by day, I learned the names of the fish and the little paths to the beach. I learned to live slower, lighter, freer. In the afternoons, I often sat at the small cafe at the bottom of the hill, the one with the crooked wooden sign that read Sea Breeze Cafe. The owner, a gray-haired woman who tied a red scarf, always saved me the window table. I read the paper, nibbled apple pie, and watched the boats come in. No one knew who I was. No one asked where I came from. And I liked it that way. I hung a small orchid, the only thing I brought from my old house, by the window. When I left, it had only a few wilted leaves. Now, under the sea sun, a fresh green shoot has popped up. I take care of it every day, the way I'm learning to take care of myself again. At night, I shower with warm water as long as I want. No more knocking on the door, no more voices talking about the water bill, no more watchful eyes. I turn on the faucet and let the steam cover my body, feeling the frozen layers inside me being washed away. The water runs warm, steady, unbroken. And I realize the sound of water is no longer the sound of confinement, but the music of freedom. That night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of mint tea. The sea darkened under the moonlight. The waves were steady, soft, but deep. Each wave seemed to whisper something I had forgotten, that loss is not always an ending. Those 2 days locked in the bathroom once felt like a scar in my memory. I thought I'd carry it for life. But now, as I listen to the waves, that pain dissolves like salt in water. I no longer tremble at the thought of a turning lock. I feel calm, because if that door hadn't been locked that day, I might never have dared to step out of a life that bound me. This town is small, but enough for someone to be reborn. Every morning, I greet the newspaper seller, the mail carrier, and the kids biking past. They call me Miss Lila, as if I've lived here forever. No one is overly curious. No one brings up the past. I feel lighter by the day, as if each sea breeze carries away a little more of the old weight. I started keeping a journal. Every night before bed, I write down the small things. Today the sea was bluer than yesterday. Today I smiled a little more. Today I brewed better coffee than the first time. I write for myself, not to tell anyone. Sometimes I turn on a small radio and listen to old songs, the kind that make me remember Edward, remember when we were young, poor, and happy. I don't cry. I just smile, because in the sound of the waves, I feel like he's right beside me, watching me learn to love life again. One morning, walking along the beach, I saw a little boy building a sandcastle. A wave rolled in and washed it away. Instead of crying, he just looked at it and started again, more carefully. The sight made me stop in my tracks. I realized some things have to collapse before we know we can rebuild them, better and stronger. Whenever I look at the ocean, I see myself in it, gentle and strong, forgiving yet boundaried. I no longer resent Cole or Alyssa. I'm simply grateful to them because they pushed me to my limit, and in doing so, I discovered I could start over at an age when people assume you only wait for rest. At night, I hear the wind press over the wooden roof, and it feels like the whole world is breathing with me. I whisper to myself, half prayer, half affirmation. Leaving isn't running away. Leaving is choosing yourself. And that's exactly it. I've chosen the rest of my life with my own 2 hands. I don't need anyone's forgiveness, anyone's recognition. I only need enough courage to keep walking, enough peace to sleep well, and enough freedom to turn on warm water every morning without fearing a knock at the door. The sea out there is still open, like a door that never locks, and I, the woman once shut in a cold bathroom, have finally found the real key to my life. One early morning, when the sun was still peeking behind the sand dunes, I woke earlier than usual. The wind carried a soft salt scent and the chatter of gulls on the wooden roof. I slipped on a light sweater, poured myself a hot coffee, and stepped onto the porch. In front of me, the ocean stretched in a pale pink of dawn, waves beating gently, like the heartbeat of someone learning to love life again. I sat in the familiar wooden chair and breathed deep. The cold slid into my lungs, then melted into warmth. I remembered it all: the mornings in the old house, Alyssa's sharp footsteps, Cole's cool eyes, the click of the bathroom lock, a sound that haunted me through so many nights. But today, I didn't feel pain. I felt light and grateful, because without those 2 locked days, I wouldn't have had these 2 peaceful years. Without the betrayal, I wouldn't have known freedom. On the windowsill, my orchid is blooming. The white petals, thin as paper, tremble in the early breeze. I set my hand on the frame and whispered, "Edward, do you see? I'm all right. I found myself again." I remembered when we were young, working all week for a simple dinner, but always with laughter. Edward used to say, "If one day I'm not here, live so you're not afraid of anything." I didn't fully understand that until now. I used to fear loneliness, loss, being left behind. But it turns out the scariest thing isn't losing others, it's losing yourself in submission. Now my days are simple and complete. Morning walks on the sand, a small lunch at noon, watering the orchid in the afternoon, reading by the window at night. I've started teaching the neighbor kids how to sew and how to plant. Some days they call me Grandma Lila, and it makes me laugh. I've never had a title that felt so easy. People here are used to the sight of an older woman with silver hair, a gentle smile, and a basket of fresh fish in her hand. No one knows my backstory, and I don't need them to. I've left the past behind not by forgetting, but by setting it down where it belongs. One afternoon I received a postcard without a return address. The handwriting was familiar, a little shaky. It was Cole's. "Mom, I'm sorry. Everything's changed. I understand now." I looked at it for a long time, then tucked it into my journal between 2 blank pages. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Forgiveness isn't opening the door for someone to come back, it's closing the door that once wounded you. That night, I took another long shower. Warm water ran over my shoulders, down to the floor, fogging the mirror. I looked at my reflection, older, more lines, but calmer and more at ease than ever. I murmured, "This old lady finally did it." Outside, the waves kept breaking. I opened the door and let the breeze carry the sound inside. Moonlight fell across my shoulders, soft as an old blanket. In that moment, I knew I was truly free. No big house needed, no recognition, no thunderous revenge, just peace. Just the knowledge that the woman once locked in a bathroom has now unlocked her own life. I wrote the final line in my journal before closing it. Life can take many things from us, but if we still dare to choose ourselves, then we haven't lost anything. Then I set down the pen and blew out the candle, letting the night close softly like a finished chapter. Dawn rose again offshore. I stepped onto the porch, closed my eyes, and let the sea breeze brush my cheeks. Each wrinkle felt like it smiled with the morning light. I knew that from here on, every day is a gift of courage, of freedom, and of myself. And if someone is listening to this story, maybe a mother, a grandmother, or someone who's been hurt, I only want to say this: don't be afraid to leave if staying means losing yourself. Don't be afraid to start over, even late. Dawn always waits, as long as you're brave enough to open the door and step out. I'm grateful you've walked with me to the very end of this journey, every second, every feeling, every breath of this story. If you're listening from a faraway city, maybe New York, Seattle, Houston, or Miami, please leave a hello in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from and what made you stay to the very end. If my story touched you, Please like, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications for new journeys from women like me, women who once fell, but never gave in. Because with your listening, my story truly lives.